Good evening and welcome to Legal Tech Live, episode 105. I'm here with Chris Draper of Trokt. He's the managing director of Trokt.com. He is also a moderator of Clubhouse. It's how I got to know Chris a bit. He's become kind of a Clubhouse king of legal tech or law, tech, and justice. Chris, welcome to the show. Tell everyone a little bit about your background, because you're not the lawyer turned legal tech founder. You come from a tech background. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah. So I'm an engineer by origin. My first career is actually in aerospace, and so I arrived to the legal side initially through aerospace by worked at the FAA, where we wrote the regulations that govern commercial space transportation. So all the early SpaceX stuff, we were trying to figure out the regulations, how they'd work, how we'd put these together, how do we actually protect opportunities for innovation while still looking after public safety, which is where I think a lot of the pieces for my love of like, how do we actually take these innovative technologies where we are dealing in that case, ultra hazardous environments, or in the case of law, situations that have high catastrophe if we get them wrong. I mean, if we get these things wrong, we're talking about removing people's options for economic opportunity, access to freedom in many cases. The consequences of getting this thing wrong is high. They're all
Mm-hmm.
human problems. My expertise has always been in how do we make sure that we help humans make the best decisions possible within limited information, uh, you know, limited levels of certainty. And so I got into this through aerospace. So been doing a lot of early stage startups, a lot of back end stuff. Got into sort of building the startups, and we sort of fell into this almost by accident when we were in an incubator, and a guy came in and said, we waste $30 million a year collective bargaining in the state of Iowa for teachers. We said that sounds like that should be a stupidly solvable problem. And through this journey, we started looking at the issues of collaboration, of data management, of contract generation, arrived at where we are now, which is there is a hole that is growing in the nimbleness of data storage, the nimbleness of just life in general now, especially the pandemic going so digital. We're losing our ability to track if a document is real. And that's the problem we're starting to solve right now at Trokt is we want to be able to say, if you have a document, no matter what it is, where you store it, who has it, instead of this idea of this one wet signature original that sits there, the beauty of digital is that there can be 1,000 originals, but the way that we store documents right now, the way we think about protection, the way that we think about how we prove originality has so far prevented us from saying that's a true digital original, no matter if no one's seen it before, no matter if 8,000 people have it. We with Trokt have come up with a method for very quickly, easily, and when we say easily, we've passed the 80-year-old lawyer test, which is an 80-year-old lawyer actually got on, used it, protected his stuff in less than 8 minutes and was surprised he did it correctly. We built something that was that easy to be able to protect the permanence of a document with a probability of us being wrong that's less than getting struck by lightning 6 times. So we're pretty certain we'll be certain.
That's impressive. I've heard about these. I've heard about this type of a system. I think I've interviewed somebody before who's kind of working in that authentication space and security space. So, but Trokt, you guys have been still in the startup phase, but you've been around for 6 or 7 years, have you not?
Yep. Yeah. So for the authentication phase, as far as our thumbprinting stuff, this is a pretty new element for us. We have
Okay.
been around and stable within the actual labor relations space, contract collaboration space since 2013 is when we were there. And again, as I think as everyone knows in legal tech, getting people to change processes is difficult. So even I cringe every time someone says, "Hey, what if I just send you a Word version of the contract via email?" I mean, we all know that's wrong. I think that we know ABA guidance on reasonable protection in the case of that's completely just not on. One would argue that's unethical since there are economically viable alternatives with lower risk. But those things are difficult, and I think as we were seeing the challenges over the years, once people saw our system and got into it, they loved it. The outcomes were better. The time was better. All of those pieces that we knew would work. But as we were looking there and saying, we should probably stop fighting the tide on getting people to change process, meet them where they are, and realize that there is a far bigger, more immediate problem now with if we don't change how we think about storing these files, no matter how you made it, whether we made it, whether you scanned a picture of it, whether someone sent it to you on a text message, no matter where people are, either you can prove that's real in a more efficient, more effective, permanent manner, accepted in every court around the world, or you're going to be at an economic disadvantage and you're going to have inequities within the system take what's yours. And so we felt that was a very, very important problem that we can solve smartly, quickly.
That's great. And so for our audience, and we've got some people watching over on Facebook, Kevin, I'm glad you're here with us on Zoom. If you have questions for Chris Draper is my guest tonight. He's the managing director of Trokt, and your focus now with this thumb printer is about security and essentially authentication. And I notice on your website, you say Trokt reduces costs. Now this plays into my day-to-day work. It says every file that can be instantly proven valid or invalid by Trokt reduces the need for costly forensic analysis. Storing file thumbprints for rapid validation reduces the time and cost of compliance audits or incident response and forensics efforts. And so I would imagine that this is an example of this, Chris, might be certainly I work on the forensic side or work with the forensics experts who go through these. So if we have a data breach, for example, and information is stolen, I'm guessing if you've thumbprinted this with through Trokt's thumb printer, you can, and maybe it's not even that the information's been breached, but like we just saw in Florida earlier this week, where they had access to, there was a breach at the water plant and somebody altered information. So you're saying if information is altered or a file is altered, you can return back using thumb printer. You can go back through that without having to do a heavy forensic analysis and identify what is one of the real files and what may be planted there or something to that effect. Is that right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, exactly. So there's, when you're looking at avoiding the costs of breaches, of thefts, of forgeries, of fakes, the biggest part of that is how quickly can we actually identify what's real. For example, on average, and I'm sorry I don't have the source in front of me, there was a Durango, Colorado had a breach, and there's a great article that's done by the accounting firm that's dealing with this. And they indicate that on average, you lose about $75,000 in the first day of a fraud occurring in state government. It's going to cost you at least 25 grand to actually figure out what happened. That 1/3 relationship is pretty common, and that 1/3 relationship comes from, number one, there is a piece of saying, okay, can we catch this quick enough to know that that it happened? The second part is how quickly can we know exactly what pieces are real? For example, our first use case where we ran our first successful pilot was a small town in Virginia. It's within striking distance of DC, so you had a lot of development going on there. And one day the economic development director thought, it'd be really cool is I could probably like make a lot of money if these contracts actually went to a different place. And so she literally pulled the contracts off of a shared drive. She used Adobe to bust them apart and change a few numbers, like, who should be signing for this, where the money should go, and everything else. And over the course of time, where you had, this ended with like 16 federal indictments. I mean, this was a $23 million fraud. She admitted to stealing $2.7 million of it in just a very basic, stupidly unsophisticated theft and intrusion scenario. And it cost them $1.2 million to prove the $2.7 million theft that she admitted to stealing and told them how to steal it. We can remove that cost in so many, reduce that cost massively by being able to say, look, this contract's real, this one's fake, this is real, real. Being able to take, if your client comes in and says, I got this great case, here's all my documents for this. I'm on a construction site. They told me they aren't paying me because they said I didn't have my change orders, and here's all my change orders. I use Trokt. As a lawyer, you can quickly go through and say, hey, look, I see your 100 documents. 99 of them check out, but that one change order that our case hinges on, that $1 million verdict we're going to get, the date doesn't line up. This doesn't look like it's the right place. Being able to either stop and evaluate an intrusion or a theft or a fraud, or being able to assess the quality of the case you're looking at right now as quickly as possible is typically the key to making sure you don't end up losing more money than you need to. And that's the real piece we can say is, if we can lay those little anchors of truth within the operation of a lawyer, within their client, within logistics, construction, anything where primarily you have high boom bust, highly regulated, the margin is too thin. Our first major integration was a logistics company. Every truck is valued at it's at $20,000. The margin on that's a few $100. There's 4 documents that are vital, and if you don't have them, the other side's like, nah, we don't believe you're not paying. That weight ticket isn't real. If you get out $500,000 in ARs, because it costs you about $5,000 for each truck for a few $100 of margin to prove it, you're just going to eat it. We can take that process down to a matter of 10 cents. And so you can actually say, okay, everything's real. We've proven it's real. Now, now what are we going to do? It's getting everyone to a stable footing, knowing that those anchors of truth are there. That's the most important part of this, no matter where you implement it.
Excellent. And I should note, Linda Warren Seeley says, good to see you, Chris. She's watching over in the Facebook group. So that brings me kind of to this question. If we're looking at an evidentiary respect, so I'm the trucking company. So what do? Am I the one who purchases Trokt? And then every time we create a file, we have that as it's automatically imprinted or thumbprinted rather. If we're using that for all of our files, do we integrate it on our system? How does that work?
Yep. Yeah. So for small firms, individuals, so if you're a solo practitioner at a small firm, or a lot of your construction companies are small firms where one person's running a laptop in a back office. These aren't big SAP systems. These are primarily, when we're dealing in, 98% of all businesses in America are small businesses according to SBA, right? So you're
Right.
talking about, less than 100 people. You're talking about, tens of employees on average, 70% or less than 50 people. And so to address that market, what we have, if you go on to Trokt.com right now, you can download the thumb printer, and what you're really downloading is a little application. It sits on your desktop, and you can either choose a file 1 at a time or 10 at a time in a whole bulk to do, or you can actually watch folders the same way you would with Dropbox, anything else. And you can actually even watch Dropbox folders. You can watch SharePoint folders, watch Google folders. And
explain for our listeners, on live listeners and for podcast listeners later, what do you mean by watch folders, in case somebody's not aware?
Yeah, apologies. So like if you run the system and you set under settings, hey, I want every file that arrives in this folder to be thumbprinted. You would just set it up one time. So you'd say, you know what, I set up a contracts folder where it's my finalized contracts for this type of client, or it's my finalized contracts for this. And you can watch any number of folders like that. And anytime you go, whether you DocuSign it, whether you ink sign and scan it, as long as you save it in that folder, as soon as it hits that folder, our system sees it hit. It takes that thumbprint and it does it on your computer. It tells your computer to run a routine on your side. We never see your file. We don't open your file so we can read it. We don't see, we instruct your computer to do the processing. And all that happens is that thumbprint, that proof of all the ones and zeros in this file are sent to our network, and your file stays secure the whole way. So you download the thumb printer, you either have it watch the folders that are working in your process, whatever you want to name that folder, however you want it to sit, everything that hits it is instantly protected for life at a cost of $1 per write. So no matter what size your company is. Yep.
Okay, so $1 per write, is that $1 per file? A lot of people may not know what the write is, how that works.
Yeah, so it's $1 per file or $1 per package of files. For example, let's say we had a court system that was having challenges where they had a bespoke system, and once in a while things got out of line. Like, some people owed more money than they should have, and others owed less than they should have. And when you're withholding money from checks, you should get those things right. And there's just a
Right.
lot of movement around those numbers. And so where their use case was, they wanted to every day say, here's all the files in our system. We package them all up into one, and we want to actually save the thumbprint for that whole package of files. That's still only $1 because it's one file. If someone says, this is my signed contract, it's one document, it's whether it's one page or 800 pages, that's one file, it only costs $1. So the way that our system works is whatever that single file that you're going to need to validate someday is, it's $1 for that valid protection for the remainder of its life. There's no ongoing fees. You don't have to pay, don't have to pay Adobe forever to store your stuff. You don't have to actually, you can move it wherever you want. If your senior partner says, I like these S3 buckets because the kid in the hoodie said this is awesome, right? Ironically, I'm wearing my hoodie right now, but let's assume I'm not. And so,
just a kid at heart, just a kid at heart.
At a certain age, you got to hope you can say that's true.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So no, what it really effectively does is if we can actually say, this is fundamentally what the document is, and we can remove that restriction on where it goes. We can remove that restriction on those expensive, costly moves that we make. When we do a big old integration somewhere, you package all up, you pay someone to make sure it's all there, you move it all in a new place, you pay someone to make sure it all went there correctly. Most people don't do that. If you build this system into your workflow, you don't have to worry about the chain of custody because you have that thumbprint that says, as long as you don't change this thing, as long as someone doesn't go in and modify it, as long as you don't go in and make a fundamental change to it, we will always know when we see that file again that it is always exactly the same.
So that brings me to a good, I think a good part there, or a good segue there is, as long as somebody doesn't change this. So I want to thumbprint this document. I've done the electronic signature on the purchase and sale agreement. I've sent it to the other party. They've put their electronic signature on it, sent it back to me. We now have the final document. At that point, I want a thumbprint. That would be the time, right? Not so it's not it's the memo of points and authorities, part 1, part 2, part 3, final 2, so that kind of a document is not necessarily the document you want to thumbprint, but that one that has a real economic interest in it. We've come to this agreement. This is the final document. Now I thumbprint it.
If you want to irrationally overpay us, you can do anything you want on any file you want.
Fair
However,
enough.
What we would strongly encourage, and what we also, because when people come on board, we do our best to make sure that we're doing this smartly, because this is, there's really 3 phases to contracting, right? There's our discussion of what we think we want the agreement to be. There's that validation. This is what we all agreed. And then there's the permanence that the authenticated, validated agreement remains permanent. We do that third part. So we would highly recommend that, and we don't replace DocuSign. I mean, DocuSign is an awesome product, right? We also don't replace, we don't replace Dropbox, right? Dropbox is a great product. Adobe is a great product. The question is, as long as you maintain control of things, you can prove its history, and we're of no value if you maintain control of a file forever. But that's not how the world's working. The world's working, you maintain control, tight control so far. You may keep it in DocuSign up to a certain point. You'll have your copy, but then there's going to be ones that go out into the world. At that point where you lose control of it, physical control of it, we provide you that certainty, that insurance that you hope you never need, which says when this left your control, all the ones and zeros of this file were exactly in this form. And if you ever see it again someday, when you get to court and one side says, this is a file you sent me, and you say, well, this is a file we sent you, and they happen to be, completely different, you can tell this one is a exact digital original of the one that left your control, no matter where it went. The other one, something's different. We don't know what. We don't actually, because we don't open it to read it in a readable manner. We don't do track changes. We don't tell you what is different about it. But we can then let you, if you're the forensic analyst, if you're someone else who's contesting this, we can say, maybe someone just screwed up. Maybe they took this scan and maybe they printed it, then scanned it again. we can't tell you the content in it isn't the same if you do something like that. We can just tell you all the ones and zeros are aligned in this video or in this file, or they're not. And this is where the cat video actually is an interesting one, is one of the things we never expected people to be nervous about. We were at a National Center for State Courts thing on the AI document the other last, well, boy, COVID makes everything feel like 58 years, but I think it was only last December.
Probably last December. Yeah, that
Yeah,
sounds right.
It was one of the things as a big concern in the courts is we don't know what we're going to do about, deep fakes. And as we started talking to small towns, they were also concerned about deep fakes. And we didn't understand why until, one guy said, well, our video of the city council meeting, that's our truth. If all of a sudden someone fakes it to say we owe Billy $2 billion, that's currently how our small towns believe truth is. And if, however it got that way, whether it's a video we thumbprint to make sure we can prove that this is not the video was, we probably don't owe Billy $2 billion. We probably need to find some other verification for that. This isn't real anymore. We can fight those fakes, forgeries, and fraud by saying, we know this is exactly what it was, or we know this isn't what it was for whatever reason that is.
So it is a little piece of code. You say ones and zeros. This is a little piece of code that is thumbprinted on their document when it's final, and that hash number is saved on your blockchain. Is that Trokt has its own blockchain? Is that how that works? How does that work?
Yep. Yeah, so there's two slightly important nuances. There is, we do not attach anything to the file itself. We work just like a human thumbprint. So you know how if we have someone who goes and, so I used to be in, when I was of different proportions and looked a lot more threatening. I was a bouncer in San Francisco years and years ago.
Okay.
And so when you register for that, they take a thumbprint of you. It goes on file and sits there. They don't put a chip in me. They don't, well, to the best of my knowledge, I guess. I haven't gotten the vaccine yet, so we don't know.
You don't
know.
Pretty
sure they won't. But they take a thumbprint of you. That thumbprint sits on file. It knows nothing else really about me except this was me, my address. We do the same thing with a file. We look at all the ones and zeros. We then take all those ones and zeros and use, as we say, we use SHA 256, which is accepted in courtrooms all around the world since 2012. Okay. People say if you have two SHA 256s, we're just stipulating those the exact same file. It basically takes the order of all those ones and zeros, it mashes it all up, chops off the front end of it, and it gives you this alphanumeric code. You cannot recreate the file. You cannot actually tell what the file type was, anything about it. But we have the exact same as that thumbprint if I went in as a bouncer and got it registered. So if you ever see that file again, you compare that thumbprint again. And we do store that in what we have as the back end tech for us is a blockchain. But we're using what we call a neo-public blockchain that uses an Ostrom dynamics principle. That's I'll explain those pieces, which is
okay, because boom, Ostrom dynamics. You're losing me there.
You had some some heavy hitters on these questions, so I want to make sure I get the and now we'll break it down to what that actually means, because we use blockchain in our marketing zero, because
I noticed that.
We learned quickly that as soon as we say blockchain, I was like, oh, is this like that Bitcoin stuff? Like, no.
Yeah.
No.
I wanted to give you credit for that, and I talked to some others, and I noticed only at the very bottom, because I understood from what you were pitching that this had to be tracked on blockchain myself, but I only saw it at the very bottom of your website, your neo hybrid blockchain, and I thought that was interesting, and I give you credit for that, because 4 or 5 years ago, 3-4 years ago in legal technology, it was overhyped and overutilized and confused with, say, cryptocurrency, and then many of the applications just did not work. So I think that's a wise choice, and I want to make sure I give you credit for that.
Well, and this is where actually Linda Seeley, who's watching on Facebook, has a whole ton of positive responsibility in this in some ways, is that I actually literally come from a very aggressive blockchain skeptic origin, right? And the reason is a lot for as we talk about, you see all these use cases batted around of saying, oh, blockchain will save everything. Oh, Ethereum will be the greatest thing ever. And oh, we're going to just like save everything and we'll have no truth and everyone's going to be honest and it's going to be believable, which you're like, I don't know if you've actually hung out in the real world, but I don't know anyone who in a group gets more honest like that. There's the fundamental of that makes no sense. But the thing about public blockchain is that it works because anyone can plug in. Anyone who actually has the energy to contribute to the blockchain can, and those who have more energy actually get to dictate who actually closes out blocks first, wins the coins first. I mean, this is why you see over 76% of the hash rate of Bitcoin comes from one region of the world, right? And now I'm not saying that to be xenophobic or anti or nationalistic or something, but
Sure.
the issue is any network that requires stability needs to ensure that there are no components that have a supermajority of quality in the network. So number one, when you start using these neoliberal concepts that are in blockchain, which is anyone can jump in, anyone can do it, and whoever has inequitable resources gets to dictate system quality, that's a threat. And especially in a legal tech environment, that's a significant threat. Now you put on top of that everyone has access to the network, everyone has access to the same chain, and as long as you don't put anything in there that it can be broken back out in a meaningful way that releases data, fine, that's some protection. But at the same time, when you're looking at those things, you have a contextual data breach that's accessible, that's inherent in the design of public blockchain. Because we know who's who in every transaction, if you're a divorce attorney and you start to say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to actually take all of my divorce settlements and I'll hash them still, but then I'll put them into the network and then I'll save them all there forever for everyone. So you can't really see the file, but you can see who that divorce attorney worked with all the time. This is how we caught the Russians in the hacking piece, was we figured out one dude, Boris, was working with all these other guys, and it turns out all those other guys just all happen to be government contractors who happen to be with a group that may have had nefarious things. Now, I'm not saying divorce attorneys are Russian agents, but what I am saying is that you probably don't want to, if you're going through a divorce, be known as a person associated with a lot of business with a divorce attorney. It's exactly like encrypted email. Encrypted email in a state like ours, in Iowa, where it's 50-50, I don't have to open the packet anymore to know if I receive an email from a divorce attorney that's encrypted that was intended for my partner. I have actually already breached confidentiality because I know the value of that dispute. Public blockchain is almost fundamentally impossible to not provide contextual data breaches, regardless of whether you can see the packet. And if you put something into the blockchain that's encrypted that you don't want to be seen, you had better hope that the rate of encryption breaking is slower than the rate that the value of that packet dissipates. Because hopefully by the time they break it, because they will, I mean,
they will.
Blockchain mining is essentially a form of decryption. So, I mean, if you go and put something in there, you had better hope the value of it expires. And when you start looking at most use cases people are talking about, restorative justice, right? You cannot ethically use public blockchain for restorative justice awards. A restorative justice award is, I have a minor who committed a nonviolent offense. They've gone and they've worked out with the victim some solution. If you store that award onto a blockchain, you will forever be tagging that individual with the fact that something was there, which is illegal.
Which is why we seal things in California and many other states when it involves a minor. It's sealed, and when they become an adult, that is essentially forgotten. That you're saying if that's on a public blockchain, that's lost.
There's no way you're sealing it. And the fact that someday it's going to be unsealed, but more importantly, it's already unsealed in the fact that the person who probably wrote it was probably the restorative justice program. And it turns out that you only get something written there if they, to you, if you were in it.
If you were in it. So you don't even have to give away. Yeah, that itself is a breach. Interesting. Very interesting.
And so what we have done is, and this is where Linda Seeley comes in, we've actually for the last year and a half had a significant standardization effort that's been underway in the section of online dispute resolution is led by Pew, by National Center of Technology Dispute Resolution, NCSC. There's the whole acronym soup of way too many over 3 letters, which means I'll forget them.
Yep.
And so
guaranteed with me, guaranteed I'll forget them.
I'm just glad NASA is readable.
It is readable. I agree. I agree entirely.
But I think when you're looking at this, in these standards and where we're going to go, when we look at reasonable protection, again, reasonable protection by ABA standard, this is 1.6 and the clarification on it, it fundamentally is, if you have the ability to reduce the risk of misuse of this system, it's economically viable, you should. How we looked at this is, we did not see a way to use a public blockchain. So what we decided to do instead was have what we're calling neo-public, which is where technologically all the servers are known to each other and no new server can plug in without the community knowing. We also, in our main chain, have zero context. We only know what node sent it, and we only know the hash. We know nothing else. And so because of that, unless you break in and do something fraudulent with the node or something there, the chain itself, the public aspect of it, has no context to it, number one. The second major innovation that our Ostrom governance model, basically, Ostrom is the tragedy of the commons. How do you keep people from overgrazing? Our constitutional theory is truth is one of those resources where if we inequitably and misuse it, it will have no value. If we start debasing the value of how much a right is worth, it's going to debase the entire network. It's going to debase the entire value of truth. And so an Ostrom governance model, which is led by Angie Raymond as the head of our governance committee. She's out of the Ostrom workshop at the University of Indiana, but really brilliant on these governance pieces. We've come up with a really brilliant model, which basically states we use what we're terming a static proof of stake, which means if a node writes, every single other node gets paid 2 cents, regardless of what it is, regardless of time. We expect that node and its governance committee to validate this is something that is appropriate for writing into a further network. Once you write it, every other node gets paid the same thing. So you get rid of this issue of one node can dominate the others as an economic function. And if we don't have acceptance of a choice by the others, everything stays static. So instead of one side driving and with their voting shares being able to dictate system quality, basically our system quality stays the same unless enough people accept a desire to change, and that's the only time we actually see a change. So on the big front, we got some really big fancy words, and those big fancy words fundamentally come down to, we felt that we needed to have a system where the core pieces of blockchain, which is I have a piece of data, when I add a new one, it blends with the other piece of data so they can never be separated. That fact that they blend together, that they chain together, means that we are immutable, meaning it can never be changed. So one piece, we can't have block A coming in and being after block C. They'll always be in sequence as they go. Right. That means that when 1 in 4 courts have already specifically identified that blockchain is appropriate use of time stamping, we know that our technique is falling into that, with Delaware leading, which means, I think we did an insurance group do a risk analysis, and I think it was something like the analysis said that it was like 1 to the negative 37 that a court would reject this concept. Apparently Delaware is important. So
yeah, it is. It's very important.
So those are our big pieces. Yeah.
So who are your, and we're about 37 minutes in, folks. If you have questions for Chris Draper, please get them in. He is the managing director of Trokt, trokt.com, TROKT.com. So please get those in. Chris Conjero says hi. Veronica Quinton says sounds interesting. So if you have questions, please get those in. Chris, who is your target market? Are we talking big firms, small firms, medium size, legal departments? It sounds like this is applicable to just about anybody who wants to use it.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at the firm size, our firm size, we really built this to be an equalizer for those firms that are mid-size and lower. We
Okay.
know the mid-size and lowers that you aren't going to have the money to pay for the major secure storage. You aren't going to have the money to pay for the big old SAP system. I mean, when someone comes in and says, "Oh yeah, this is going to be simple. It'll just be 300,000. It'll take you 6 months." It's no big deal. I think the 10 senior partners who are about to retire are probably like, "You're out of your freaking mind." So what we can do at those mid-size and down from a legal side is, again, an 80-year-old lawyer can actually get our stuff onto their computer, have it up and running in less than 8 minutes. And what we fundamentally have is when a client has a matter and comes to you, they all of a sudden their bill may be $5,000 to $10,000. You're adding $1 of hard cost that passes through to the client to provide them permanent protection that when it leaves your control as a law firm, and 18 months in, 18 months in, you probably should delete it. You shouldn't have this stuff forever. Lawyers should not be data repositories.
Right.
So 18 months in, when you get rid of it, if they have a matter 5 years in, you've given them for $1 pass-through cost the opportunity to be able to prove this is the exact original we had before. So your work is permanently protected. And so our Thumbprinter was built for that level. Because I think that's where the biggest need is. When you're looking at our primary clients we have right now, it's again going to be in small to mid-sized firms that have documents flying all over the place in, again, boom bust industries, highly regulated industries, construction, as we said before. If you can't prove your change order didn't exist before the work, you're in trouble. If you can't prove the weight ticket that was on your truck when you got it that you're now doing your billing against wasn't right, you're not getting paid. These types of things, which they seem relatively innocuous until all of a sudden, you're in arbitration. The arbitrator says, well, they told us that your document isn't right. You guys paid $20,000, and the analyst said, well, we can't see that either of them are clearly forged. Like, oh, well, okay.
Yeah. And from my
Yeah.
experience, there's huge litigation over construction claims and change orders, and the bigger the project, the more expensive that gets. So it looks like we have a question here from Kevin. Kevin asks, it sounds like Trokt can be applied to any legal sector. Just wondering if estate planning, verifying wills is a specific use case you've looked at or have had clients in.
That's one we're trying to target heavily because, again, that is exactly one of those where the timestamp is vital. With all these things, the big area where we are right now, I mean, we're in Lex Lab right now with Drew Armstrong and Alice. I'm butchering her last name. Alice Armitage have been really vital for us to help make sure we can best communicate where our value props are, because I think a lot of what we're needing to do is translation and education.
Yeah.
Which is why, as you see, we got rid of all blockchain discussion.
Yeah.
I think
sorry, I have to ask you. I have to touch on it because it's a legal tech discussion. But it's it's fair as a marketing technique that you remove that.
Well, and this is where wills and estates, those sort of pieces. I mean, you've basically built a document that in 10 years, 20 years, you're going to have, as we've seen, a pretty ugly fight over. And if someone can get in there and say, you know what, this thing's fake, and you're the third lawyer that's handled it since it got turned over, and you can't say, God, I don't know, it's lost on Dropbox somewhere. You're in trouble. We can say, this is the exact document. This thing has been completely unmodified since this time. Yeah, we switched to Dropbox and Box and then S3 and then back to Dropbox, and we put it on someone's shoe drive in their basement. But it still came out. You know what? This is still the exact digital original. For trust and estates, that's a multi-million-dollar problem you can avoid with $1 lifetime. Yeah,
and that's and in my again, I refer to my day-to-day work on the wills and trusts and estate planning. What you're promoting here is basically the new version of forensic document examination, which often comes in the wills and trusts. Well, we got to see if the signatures are correct and the, and the dates are right and things like this. This is kind of a workaround from that. This is the newer version.
We don't there will always be digital forensic analysis in the same way
Sure.
there will always be, there will always be human required solutions and strategy. There will always be, there will always be fraud. What we are providing is another anchor of truth that is able to cut out some of the pieces that are most expensive, that have the most uncertainty, that take the most time. There's no way of replacing a great digital forensic analyst, and we don't do that. What we do is we move the front end of the analysis at the origin process.
So when a digital forensic analyst looks at this, they can know, well, I don't have to really go into a deep forensic analysis here because I see, because of this thumbprint. So it speeds it up and probably reduces that cost, is what you're saying.
If you're a forensic analyst and all of a sudden you can, before it would have taken you 4 weeks, and now you can be like, oh, well, in 36 seconds, I can now realize that 98% of your documents are good. And I can spend that time to worry about those last 2%, which is where all the cases are. So it's the 2% that are lunatics, it's the 2% that are problems, it's the 2% that are going to determine whether or not someone knows you're the forensic analyst for them or whether you're the lawyer that got it right. We need to get the stuff you don't need to worry about out of your way. And that's what Trokt does quickly, efficiently, and cost effectively.
Excellent. And Mark Deutsch asks in the Facebook group, are you seeking funding?
We're debating it at the moment. Right now, not this instant. We're looking at a potential round later in the year, which would be focusing on hopefully focusing on sales. We have a few anchor clients that are developing. We have some great prospects with ironically Belt and Road projects over on the African continent. You have a lot of investment there. You have a lot of paper stuff. What we saw in Nigeria just recently, where when the courthouses burned down, where some of them were attacked and burned down, they burned down all the records of truth there. And now you're in this whole process where you're essentially mediating what our agreements were that all burned up. We can be a very, very quick solution to allow for those projects to go forward in confidence all across the continent, because we can start validating those files off of a lawyer's laptop.
And I feel like, we touched on, and because we have people watching, I'm going to have to ask it because it's funny, but or not so much funny. I mean, it's a legitimate concern for a lot of people, right? A lot of people are taking their nudes and they're sharing nudes these days. And that's a concern. And others are maybe saying that something is a nude that belongs to somebody. And there you have the blackmail issues and things like that. Is this, does this play a role? And I guess that goes with the deep fake as well. We certainly have more digital copies of things that maybe we don't want out there, or maybe we do want to prove are ours. Have you had any application of Thumbprinter on that type of an issue?
Yeah, so we've had a few individuals that want to actually add modules on top of a node that would use our backbone network for providing that type of being able to prove a positive, right? I'm sorry, be able to prove a negative.
Prove a negative,
our core product is able to say, we've seen this before, this is exactly the same. And so we don't, if we see something that isn't there, we can't say it isn't. But when you're looking at these things where the most important one on images or on those other types of things that you don't want people to see, our biggest use case on that is actually intellectual property.
Okay.
So when you're looking at smaller startups, you have the engineering firm. As someone who was in an engineering advanced technology division, I can tell you that you don't usually fill out your your invention disclosure forms very well. And then legal's pissed at you. And the fact is, I'm busy. We're working on something really cool here. Can you come back later? And so if all of a sudden we build something really, really cool, whether it's in your basement, you don't want to show anyone, whether it's in your company and the compliance is just like, God, can you just document what you're doing? We're a solution that the engineers don't have to touch. They can say, hey, here's something cool. They type it up, they drop in the folder, it's thumbprinted, and now if it goes nowhere, don't worry about it. If it goes somewhere, you have that timestamp it existed. If you have, for example, if you're an artist and you make the next greatest hook and you just save in your basement for 10 years and you're finally like, you know what, I'm going to take it to an agent and try and sell it. And that agent says, this is awesome. And then Katy Perry steals it from you. We can prove that that hook was yours from 10 years ago. Where right now, you have your idea books, you have these, you have this shoebox, you have to go off and figure out how to pay 50 grand for someone to say that this secret that no one has ever seen actually did exist. We can provide that on the IP side without any hassle to the engineers. They just have to know, as soon as you have something cool, drop an image, drop a copy, put in this folder, don't worry about it, don't fill out the form, fine. And you can timestamp it the way that we're needing them to put in hours and hours now. We can protect them in a way that is irrefutable in court. And so on the images side, that same value is there, but preventing something that we haven't seen, we can say we haven't seen it. We can't say that that's fake unless you actually have a module, which we do have.
So you're talking, you've given examples of the blurred lines example, almost exactly the blurred lines argument over where they got that little hook or that piece of the track that I forget who the litigation was. I remember the song was Blurred Lines, but you're saying had the digital copy been able to and a lot of artists are starting with digital copies rather than, so if they had this thumbprint on there, you could say, look, I made this hook, they took it off of my SoundCloud, and that solves that maybe limits the or maybe moves somebody to a settlement sooner than otherwise.
Yeah, and this is one that, not to oversell blockchain the same way people to say, oh, we're going to solve cancer. Maybe,
Right.
maybe not.
Right.
The issue, and this is very, very important from our side, is when we look at these issues, which is, did the original exist? Has the original been unmodified since a certain date? We can prove that. If Katy Perry steals it and then changes a little bit, and you're like, well, I don't know, did that inform it?
Yeah, that's still going to have to be litigated.
That's going to be litigated. But we can at least go into that litigation saying, no one has heard this hook. It's been around for 10 years in my basement. This is the exact one. It went to this agent, and now Katy Perry is making billions off of it. We can prove those anchors of truth that reduce the cost and reduce the uncertainty of proving those pieces are yours, even if no one else has ever seen them before. We can be that third-party validation because we can prove the fundamentals of it, that thumbprint of it, essentially taking the DNA of that file away without ever knowing what the DNA makes. We can say, this is exactly it. And if you think we're wrong, it's going to happen less often than get struck by lightning 6 times.
That's great. That's great. And Natalie says, thank you, Nick and Chris. Great, awesome discussion. Thanks, Natalie. And Chris, we've been talking for about 50 minutes here. I don't want to keep you. I know you're a couple hours ahead of me at least. Tell people, is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to cover about what Trokt is offering right now?
I mean, right now, as I say, if you're willing to go to Trokt.com, it's able to be downloaded for for Windows or Mac right now. Buying credits for it. When you just sign up, we give you a few free credits to start and try it out. So we're not requiring drops of blood and social security cards or anything. You can just go up, click on get some credits, you'll get some free credits, and then our pricing is very straightforward. It's $1 per file with discounts for monthly and annual subscriptions. We're doing our best to keep the videos up. So if you please follow us and like us on the YouTube and everything else. But I think that the most important thing of this is our goal is to make this stupidly simple for anyone to be able to equalize their access to proving their anchors of truth with all the big boys. We're not saying having a great SAP system is bad. We're not saying you shouldn't centralize some of your files. What we're saying is we should have a better way in this digital way to prove what truth is. And we're going to have to change how we look at security because the internet is changing and the level of our dependence on it. The internet was made by a bunch of engineers in a basement who all trusted each other and wanted to talk faster. Well, that's not the world we're in now. The internet has caught up to the world of a bit of cynicism, a bit of people who may not always be acting in a trusting environment. And we're going to have to rethink how especially our small to mid-sized firms, those companies are 98% of the backbone of our, you're not really the backbone, you're 98%, you're the whole body.
Right.
We need to be rethinking how the vast majority of us are protecting what is ours. And that's really been our mission from the start here, is how do we provide that access to people owning their anchors of truth in a way that they get to control and isn't controlled by a long-term, subscription, a long-term cost that's constantly changing. It's yours, will stay yours forever.
Excellent. And Chris, how do folks find you if they want to get in touch and they want to learn more?
Yep. Well, yeah. If on Twitter, my handle is the other Draper. On Clubhouse, if you're in, I'm the one who starts cat rooms, but also a few good ones on Tuesdays on Law, Tech, and Justice. And at Trokt.com, my email is just chris@Trokt.com. Please, if you have any questions, any way we can help you. We do have the ability to integrate. We're built with a very simple API, so it takes less than an hour to be built into a standard system. But please let us know if we can help in any way.
All right, great. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Next week, we are off. Our guest tonight was Chris Draper of Trokt.com. I will be out of pocket next week. I'm going to try and take some vacation. And we will be back the following week with Priori Legal, with the founders of Priori Legal. So stay tuned for that. And thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. Chris, don't disappear after we end recording.
Thanks for having me, Nick. This is great.
Thank you.